My name is Robin Allen 24, and I've always been the responsible one in my family. But last year, my parents pushed me too far. Don't overreact, they said your brother deserves this more. They were planning a lavish Hawaii resort trip for my younger brother's 21st birthday, pulling money from our family's shared savings fund to cover it. I tried to reason with them $40,000 for a party. It was reckless, especially when I'd been saving for my own future. But they didn't listen. They never did. Every objection I raised was met with eye rolls or lectures about family loyalty. My brother, meanwhile, was already picking out VIP packages and inviting half the town. I felt invisible, my voice drowned out by their obsession with his big day. So one night I stopped arguing. I didn't yell or cry. I just walked into the kitchen, placed a key on the table, and left before they came back. That key wasn't just for the house, it was my way of closing a chapter. I'd done something they'd never see coming, something that would change our family forever. I'd read stories like this online where people take a stand against unfair treatment, and I knew it was time to share mine. Stick around to hear how it all unfolded. It's a wild ride. If you've ever felt ignored by family, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Let's talk about standing up for yourself. Let me take you back to how our Woodbury home worked. Growing up in our quiet Minnesota suburb, I always felt like the odd one out in my family. There was my dad, a steady guy who spent long hours as a sales manager, always coming home with stories of his latest deals. My mom, a part-time librarian, kept our house running like clockwork, her schedule pinned to the fridge like a military plan. Then there was my younger brother, Brandon, 20, who somehow glided through life without a care. The three of them seemed to share a bond I could never quite break into, a rhythm that left me on the outside looking in. Our family had a shared savings fund, a substantial inheritance from my grandpa meant to be divided equally among the four of us. It was our safety net. My dream was to use my share for a down payment on a house, while I assumed Mom and Dad saw it as their retirement cushion. But that fund felt more like a distant promise. At 24, I was grinding away as an accountant, my days filled with spreadsheets and deadlines. I contributed a chunk of my paycheck to household expenses, covering groceries or the electric bill when things got tight. Meanwhile, Brandon lived like he was untouchable. A couple of years back, Mom and Dad bought him a sleek Mustang Cherry Red, no questions asked. He didn't have a job, hadn't worked more than a summer gig at a burger joint, yet there he was, cruising through Woodbury, grinning like he owned the place. It wasn't just the car that set my teeth on edge. When we were in high school, Brandon was always stirring up trouble, skipping classes, mouthing off to teachers, even getting caught with beer at a football game. I'd watch stunned as Mom would march into the principal's office, her voice smooth as honey, convincing them it was just boys being boys. Dad would chuckle, saying, "He's got spirit, that one." Meanwhile, I'd get grounded for a week just for missing curfew by 10 minutes. I still remember one night sitting in my room hearing Brandon stumble in past midnight. The next morning, Mom was in the kitchen flipping pancakes for him like nothing happened. My stomach twisted, not out of jealousy, but because my own efforts seemed invisible. I tried to make my voice heard. At family dinners, I'd bring up practical ideas, ways to cut costs, maybe invest part of the savings fund for better returns. But Dad would wave me off, saying, "You worry too much," before turning to Brandon to ask about his latest video game obsession. Mom would nod along, her attention locked on him like he was the sun, and I was just a shadow. Once I suggested we all pitch in for a home repair fund, but Brandon smirked, saying, "Why stress? We've got the savings." Mom laughed and Dad changed the subject. My words just dissolved into the air. The unfairness didn't hit me all at once. It was a slow burn. I'd come home after a 12-hour shift, my bank account scraped thin from helping with bills, only to see Brandon sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone, not a care in the world. I wasn't mad about the money or the car. I just wanted my sacrifices to matter, to have my place in the family acknowledged. But every time I spoke up, I felt like I was shouting into a void. Over time, those moments piled up, each one a small cut, deepening a resentment I didn't even realize I was carrying. In our house, Brandon was the star, and I was just the supporting act expected to clap along. That dynamic shaped everything in our home. I'd watch Mom fuss over Brandon's laundry or Dad slip him cash for gas, while my contributions like paying half the internet bill went unnoticed. I once overheard Mom bragging to a neighbor about Brandon's charisma, as if I was just the boring one who paid the bills. It wasn't about the praise, it was about fairness. I started keeping a mental tally of every time my ideas were ignored or my efforts overlooked. By the time I was ready to take a stand, that tally was long enough to fill a notebook. But back then, I was still trying to believe we could be a family where everyone's voice mattered. I was wrong. Last spring, Brandon came home with a big announcement. He burst through the front door, his grin wider than I'd ever seen, and declared he wanted to throw his 21st birthday party at a resort in Waikiki, Hawaii. The idea hit me like a punch. A trip to Hawaii wasn't just a party, it was a massive expense, the kind that could derail anyone's financial plans. I stood there frozen as he rattled off details about beachfront venues and tropical-themed decorations, his eyes sparkling with excitement. He wasn't just dreaming, he was already acting like it was a done deal. Brandon's girlfriend Alyssa was right beside him, fueling the fire. She'd been scrolling through travel sites on her phone, showing him pictures of a 5-star resort with infinity pools and private cabanas. "It's perfect for you," she said, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "You only turned 21 once, right? Go big or go home?" I couldn't believe how casually she pushed for something so extravagant, as if money grew on trees. Alyssa had always been the type to chase flashy moments, designer bags, weekend getaways, but this was next level. She kept tossing out ideas, a live band, custom cocktails, even renting a yacht for a sunset cruise. Each suggestion made my stomach twist tighter, knowing where the funding would likely come from. That evening, over dinner, Dad brought it up like it was no big deal. "We've been talking," he said, glancing at Mom. "We think it's a great idea to use the family savings fund to cover Brandon's party." My fork stopped midair. The savings fund, our shared inheritance, the one I'd been counting on for my own future, was suddenly on the table for a one-night bash. Mom nodded, her face calm but firm. "It's a milestone," she said. "We want to make it special for him." I tried to swallow my shock, but it lodged in my throat. They hadn't even asked my opinion, as if my stake in that fund didn't matter. I spent the next few days crunching numbers in my head, my accounting brain kicking into overdrive. A quick search online showed the resort Alyssa had picked cost at least $20,000 for a weekend rental. Add in flights for Brandon's friends, catering, decorations, and that yacht Alyssa kept raving about, and the total was easily pushing $40,000. That was a huge chunk of our savings money, meant for things like my dream of owning a home or Mom and Dad's retirement. The risk was glaring. Draining that fund for a single party could leave us all vulnerable. I couldn't stay silent. One afternoon, while Mom was in the kitchen chopping vegetables, I tried to reason with her. "What if we threw the party here in Woodbury?" I suggested, keeping my tone steady. "We could rent a nice venue, have a big barbecue, maybe hire a DJ. It'd be fun and way cheaper." Before Mom could respond, Brandon overheard and scoffed from the living room. "A barbecue, seriously?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's so stingy. I'm not some kid turning 10. This is my 21st, and I want it to be epic." His words stung, but what hurt more was Mom's silence. She just kept chopping, not even looking at me. Later that night, I tried again, this time with both of them. $40,000 is a lot, I said, spreading out my cost estimates on the dining table. "It's not just about the money, it's about what happens if we need that fund later." Dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You're always so cautious," he said, his tone dismissive. "This is for your brother. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing." Mom chimed in, her voice softer but no less firm. "Just support Brandon, okay? Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be." I stared at them. My carefully calculated numbers ignored my voice, once again pushed aside. Brandon, lounging on the couch, smirked like he'd already won. The weeks that followed were a blur of planning I wasn't part of. Brandon and Alyssa spent hours on the phone with travel agents booking flights and reserving the resort's grand ballroom. Mom and Dad were all in, pulling out credit cards to cover deposits and emailing invitations to Brandon's friends. I'd come home from work to find them huddled over brochures discussing luau themes and fire dancers, as if the cost wasn't spiraling. Every time I tried to bring up the savings fund, Mom would give me that look, the one that said I was being difficult. Dad would change the subject, asking Brandon about guest lists or drink menus. It was like I was invisible, my concerns buried under their excitement. I started losing sleep, my mind racing with what ifs. What if an emergency hit? What if the fund ran dry? I wasn't against Brandon having a party, but this wasn't just a celebration. It was a reckless gamble with our family's future. I'd spent years being the responsible one, pinching pennies, planning ahead, while Brandon got to dream big without consequences. The unfairness of it burned, but what hurt most was how easily they dismissed me. I wasn't just fighting for the money, I was fighting to be heard, and I was losing. By early summer, our house felt like a pressure cooker. The tension over Brandon's Hawaii birthday plans had been simmering for weeks, and it was about to boil over. One evening, Dad called a family meeting, something he rarely did unless it was serious. He sat at the head of the dining table, his arms crossed, and looked straight at me. "We need to make a decision about the savings fund," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Brandon's party is important, and we're asking you to agree to withdraw the money." My heart sank. This wasn't a discussion, it was a demand. They wanted my approval to drain our shared inheritance for a single night in Waikiki, and I could feel the weight of their expectation pressing down on me. I'd been losing sleep over the savings fund for months. That money was my lifeline, my chance to buy a small house in Minneapolis and build a life of my own. I'd spent years scraping together every penny, working overtime at the accounting firm, dreaming of a place with my name on the deed. But now that dream felt like it was slipping away. If we pulled out tens of thousands for Brandon's party, what would be left, a depleted fund, meant no safety net. Not just for me, but for Mom and Dad's retirement too. I tried to explain this, my voice calm but urgent. "That fund is for all of us," I said, looking between them. "If we spend it now, what happens if there's an emergency?" Dad just shook his head like I was missing the point. Meanwhile, Brandon was doubling down on his plans. I found out he'd booked first-class flights for himself and Alyssa, plus a 5-star hotel suite with an ocean view. The costs were spiraling, catering for 100 guests, a private DJ, even a custom fireworks show. When I checked the travel confirmations he'd left on the kitchen counter, the numbers made my head spin. The party was no longer $40,000. It was creeping closer to $50,000. Brandon didn't seem to care. He'd strut around the house bragging about how epic his birthday would be, while I crunched numbers in my room, trying to figure out how much of our future he was burning through. Mom wasn't helping. One night, as I was washing dishes, she cornered me in the kitchen. "You're being selfish," she said, her voice low but sharp. "This is about family, about supporting your brother. Why can't you just be happy for him?" Her words cut deep, twisting the knife of guilt. I wanted to scream that I wasn't against Brandon's happiness, just the reckless spending. But the way she looked at me like I was betraying some sacred family bond made my throat tighten. I mumbled something about needing to finish the dishes and turned away, my hands trembling in the soapy water. Mom's accusation lingered, making me question if I was the one being unreasonable. I needed to clear my head, so I called my best friend Tara. We met at a small coffee shop in downtown Woodbury, the kind with mismatched chairs and strong espresso. Tara listened as I poured out my frustration, how Dad's meeting felt like an ambush, how Mom's words made me feel like an outsider, how Brandon's spending was out of control. She leaned forward, her eyes steady. "You've been carrying this family for years," she said. "It's time to put yourself first. Don't let them guilt you into losing what you've worked for." Her words hit hard like a lifeline thrown into choppy waters. For the first time, I felt seen, and it gave me the push I needed to start looking for a way out. That night, I stayed up late, my laptop glowing in the dark. I started researching what I could do to protect my share of the savings fund. I found articles about family trusts and inheritance laws in Minnesota, terms like partition and legal recourse swimming in my head. It wasn't about fighting my family, it was about making sure I wasn't erased from the equation. I bookmarked a few law firm websites, my heart racing at the thought of taking such a bold step. I wasn't ready to call anyone yet, but the idea of standing up for myself, of drawing a line in the sand, felt like the only way to keep from drowning in their expectations. The pressure in our house was suffocating, and I was starting to realize I might have to break free to breathe. One evening in July, I decided enough was enough. The constant pressure to agree to Brandon's extravagant party had pushed me to a breaking point. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine while our family's savings were at stake. So I picked up my phone and dialed a lawyer, James Sullivan, whose name I'd found on one of the law firm websites I'd bookmarked. His voice was calm but direct when he answered, and I explained the situation, our shared inheritance, Brandon's out-of-control spending plans, and how my parents were ready to drain the fund without my consent. I needed to know my options, and I needed to know them fast. James invited me to his office in downtown Minneapolis the next day. Sitting across from him in a small, neatly organized room, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. He leaned back in his chair, jotting notes as I spoke. Then he laid out the process for partitioning a shared family fund under Minnesota law. "It's straightforward but not quick," he said. "You can file a petition to divide the assets equally, ensuring your share is protected. The court will review the fund's terms and your grandpa's will to confirm the split." He warned that it could take months and might stir up tension with my family, but it was the only way to secure what was rightfully mine. I nodded, my resolve hardening. This wasn't about punishing anyone, it was about fairness. Back home, I kept my plans under wraps. I didn't tell Mom, Dad, or Brandon about the lawyer. Instead, I quietly gathered documents, bank statements, a copy of Grandpa's will. Anything that showed the fund was meant to be split evenly. The next week, I met James again and signed the petition to partition the savings fund. It felt like a betrayal putting my signature on that paper, but it also felt like reclaiming my voice. I asked James to hold off on notifying my family until I was ready. I needed time to prepare for the fallout. While the legal process started, I began searching for a new place to live. I couldn't stay in Woodbury, not with the tension suffocating our house. I spent evenings scrolling through rental listings in Minneapolis, focusing on small apartments I could afford on my accountant's salary. I found a one-bedroom unit in Uptown with big windows and a view of the city's skyline. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, or it would be once I secured my share of the fund. I contacted the landlord, filled out an application, and put down a deposit, all without breathing a word to my family. Each step felt like a quiet rebellion, a way to take back control. Meanwhile, the cost of Brandon's party was spiraling out of control. One afternoon, I overheard Dad on the phone with a travel agent, his voice tight with frustration. $60,000, he said, pacing the living room. How did it get that high? I froze, my heart pounding. The budget had ballooned: first-class flights, a luxury resort, a yacht rental, and now some kind of VIP after-party Brandon had insisted on. Dad hung up, rubbing his temples, but he didn't confront Brandon. Instead, he turned to Mom and muttered about making it work. I stood in the hallway, unseen, realizing they were still willing to pour everything into this, even as the numbers kept climbing. That night, I sat at my desk, pen in hand, and wrote a letter. It wasn't angry or bitter, just clear. I explained why I'd taken legal action. The savings fund was meant for all of us, not just one night of extravagance. I wrote that I'd always tried to support our family, but I couldn't sacrifice my future for Brandon's party. I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and left it on the living room coffee table where Mom and Dad would see it first thing in the morning. It wasn't a goodbye, not yet, but it was my way of drawing a line. I went to bed with a strange mix of fear and relief, knowing I'd finally taken a stand. By late August, I made a move that changed everything. I'd packed my essentials clothes, a few books, my laptop into 2 suitcases, and loaded them into my car. Before leaving the house, I took one last walk through the living room, my footsteps echoing in the silence. On the dining table, I placed the envelope from the night before, the one with my letter explaining why I had to protect my share of the family fund. Next to it, I set the house key, its weight heavier than it should have been. I didn't look back as I drove away from Woodbury, heading toward my new apartment in Minneapolis. It was the hardest step I'd ever taken, but it felt necessary. A few days later, Dad called, his voice shaking with anger. "You went behind our backs," he said, barely letting me get a word in. "Filing a petition. That's betrayal." Mom was on the line too, her tone icy. "We raised you better than this," she said. Their words stung, but I'd expected it. The legal notice from James Sullivan's office had reached them, outlining my request to partition the savings fund. They saw it as an attack, not a defense of my rights. I tried to explain that I just wanted fairness, but Dad cut me off, saying, "You've torn this family apart." I hung up my hands, trembling, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Brandon took it to another level. I woke up one morning to find my phone buzzing with notifications. He'd posted a long rant on social media calling me selfish and money-obsessed. He painted himself as the victim, saying I'd ruined his birthday plans by sabotaging the family. Friends of his people I barely knew chimed in with comments, some calling me greedy. I stared at the screen, my chest tight as his words twisted the truth. I didn't respond, I didn't have the energy. But the public shaming hurt more than I'd expected, like a wound I couldn't ignore. Then came a call from my Uncle Thomas. He'd heard about the drama from Mom and reached out, his voice warm but serious. "Your grandpa set up that fund for all of you," he said. "He'd be proud of you for standing up for what's yours." Thomas had always been the practical one in the family, and his support felt like a lifeline. He reminded me that Grandpa's intention was to give each of us a secure future, not to fund lavish parties. His words steadied me, easing the guilt that Mom and Dad's accusations had stirred. A few days after moving, I ran into our neighbor Elizabeth at a grocery store near my new apartment. She'd seen Brandon's posts and heard Mom talking about my betrayal. Over coffee, she shared her perspective. "I've watched your family for years," she said, her eyes kind but firm. "Brandon's always been spoiled, and you've been carrying the load." Her empathy caught me off guard. She'd noticed the imbalance: Brandon's new car, his carefree attitude while I worked long hours. Knowing someone outside the family saw it too made me feel less alone, even if it didn't erase the pain. Settling into my uptown apartment was bittersweet. The big windows let in streams of light, and the city buzz outside felt alive, but the quiet moments hit hard. Unpacking my things, I felt a wave of relief. No more family arguments, no more being dismissed. But there was also a hollow ache. I missed the idea of the family we could have been, one where my voice mattered. Sitting on my new couch, I stared at the bare walls, wondering if I'd ever hear from Mom and Dad again. For the first time in years, I was free, but freedom came with a loneliness I hadn't anticipated. A week after the legal notice, Brandon showed up out of nowhere. I was wiping down tables at the coffee shop in Minneapolis where I'd picked up a part-time shift to cover rent. He stormed in, his face flushed, and demanded I withdraw the petition to partition the family fund. "You're ruining everything," he said, his voice loud enough to turn heads. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm in front of curious customers. I explained that draining the fund for his party risked everyone's future, including mine. But Brandon wasn't listening. "You're just jealous?" he snapped, "trying to sabotage my birthday because you can't stand me getting attention." His words hit like a slap, but I held my ground, saying I only wanted what was fair. He left in a huff, leaving me shaken but resolute. The next day, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Alyssa's father, William. His tone was clipped, irritated. "Your family's mess is dragging us into it," he said. He explained that Alyssa had expected the party costs to be covered by our savings fund, but now with my legal action, their family was stuck with unpaid deposits for flights and catering. I apologized, explaining I hadn't meant to involve them, but William cut me off. "Fix this," he said before hanging up. I stared at my phone, guilt creeping in, even though I knew the real issue was Brandon's unchecked spending. The fallout spread further. A couple of cousins texted me accusing me of shaming the family. "Why air our dirty laundry?" one wrote, saying the legal notice made us look dysfunctional to everyone in Woodbury. Another relative called, worried that my actions would tarnish our reputation at church. Their criticism stung, each message feeling like a jab at my decision to stand up for myself. I didn't respond, but the weight of their judgment made me second-guess whether I'd gone too far. At work, though, I got a small boost. My boss, Karen, called me into her office at the accounting firm. "You've been killing it with the client reports," she said, her smile genuine. "I'm recommending you for a raise." Her words were a rare bright spot, a reminder that my efforts were valued somewhere. I thanked her, feeling a flicker of pride amid the chaos. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going, knowing at least one part of my life was moving forward. That weekend, Tara came over to help me settle into my apartment. She arrived with a box of pizza and a playlist blaring from her phone, turning unpacking into something almost fun. We stacked books on shelves and hung a few picture frames, chatting about her new job and silly TV shows. She didn't bring up my family, and I was grateful for the break. Her presence was a quiet comfort, helping me fill the empty spaces of my new home without digging into the pain of everything I'd left behind. As we worked, I felt a small piece of normalcy return, even if it was fleeting. The confrontation with Brandon and the ripple effects from William and relatives left me raw, but I wasn't backing down. I'd spent too long being ignored, and now with my new life taking shape, I was starting to see my choice as strength, not selfishness. The coffee shop argument and the phone calls were just noise, painful, but not enough to make me regret fighting for what was mine. By winter, everything had settled, but nothing was the same. The court finalized the partition of the family savings fund, and I received just over $30,000, my fair share. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to change my life. I felt a quiet victory, knowing I'd fought for what was mine, even if it came at a cost. The process had been grueling, but it was done, and I could finally move forward. With the money, I bought a modest one-bedroom condo in Minneapolis. It was small, with creaky floors and a tiny kitchen, but it was mine. I spent weekends painting the walls a soft blue and setting up a desk by the window where I could work and watch the city lights. For the first time, I felt truly independent, building a life on my terms. The condo became my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe without the weight of family expectations. Dad and Mom, meanwhile, faced their own consequences. They moved out of our old house in Woodbury, renting a cheaper apartment on the edge of town. I heard through a mutual friend that they'd taken second jobs, Dad at a hardware store, Mom at a local diner, to cover debts from Brandon's canceled party and their own expenses. I felt a pang of sadness imagining them struggling, but I also knew their choices had led to this. They'd prioritized Brandon's whims over our family's stability, and now they were picking up the pieces. Brandon's life shifted too. Without the savings fund to bankroll his plans, he took a part-time job at a retail store in the mall. I learned from a cousin that his relationship with Alyssa had frayed. She'd grown distant after the party fell apart, frustrated by the financial mess and the canceled plans. Brandon's social media, once full of flashy posts, went quiet. Part of me wondered if he'd learned anything, but I didn't dwell on it. His path was his own now. I made the hard choice to cut off all contact with my family. No more calls, no texts, no holiday visits. It wasn't out of anger, but necessity. Every interaction had been a reminder of being dismissed, and I couldn't keep carrying that pain. Instead, I poured my energy into my job at the accounting firm, taking on new clients and earning Karen's trust. My life was mine to shape, and I was determined to make it count. Looking back, the biggest lesson I learned was about financial independence. I realized I couldn't sacrifice my future for someone else's recklessness, no matter how much I loved them. Standing up for myself wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I found strength in setting boundaries and prioritizing my own stability. To anyone watching this, thank you for following my story. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to make a tough call to protect your future? Share in the comments below.